Hey everyone, Dr. Frunke here with a really special knife consult. I know that I call these special sometimes, but this one is extremely special, and that's because in front of us today is the Snecx designed Buster. The Snecx Design Lab is run by Snecx Tan. He's a Malaysian designer and now knife maker who really came to the forefront with a knife called the IFS 20. The IFS 20 had a very similar sort of gray overall look to it, but it also was a special knife because it featured the ability to disassemble the knife without the use of any tools. It was similar in a lot of ways to the Ken Onion field strip technology, but far more complicated and on a far more insane level in terms of engineering and dovetailing and technology. Just an incredible piece. Those are unbelievably rare knives, but so is this. This is his second folding knife. This is the Buster. This is actually a design and engineering collaboration with Jake Hoback Knives. Jake Hoback Knives will be creating a production version of this knife in the near future, and I hope I get my hands on one of those as well so I can sort of do at least a comparison, maybe not in real life, but in terms of a sort of a pseudo comparison there. In any case, I wanted to focus on this knife. What I've done is I've actually taken off the 10-minute limit on my video here today because this knife, I'm not going to be able to explain its brilliance in only 10 minutes. The sacrifice that I have to make is that I can only film in 1080p, so I hope that's good enough for you guys. Moving right along, let's go ahead and talk about the Buster here. Snecx Tan wanted to build a knife with a couple of things in mind. The IFS 20 was a little bit of a smaller knife, a little bit more of an EDC and light-duty knife. What Snecx wanted to build was a heavy-duty, larger folding knife that would run on phosphor bronze washers and would allow him to cut open coconuts. Yes, I said that right. He, living in Malaysia, enjoys opening coconuts to get the coconut water out and enjoy that. And so these were his objectives: to have a bigger knife that could handle opening a coconut that ran on phosphor bronze washers, and to be built to that same level of precision and I should say OCD as the IFS 20. So let's go ahead and get some information on this guy from the Certificate of Authenticity. Here you can see Buster's a 4-inch folding knife with some experimental features, including the hybrid detent pen system, and we'll get into that. It's the bowler. The blade is Bowler M390 at 62 Rockwell. The pivot is 440C hardened, so is the stop pin, and it runs on phosphor bronze washers. This was made in 2017, and it has 6AL 4V titanium handle and hardware. What you should see is that this is labeled prototype 14 of 18. So Snecx built 18 of these knives, and if I'm honest, no two of them are really exactly the same. They're all very similar. Some of them are more similar than others, but he did a lot of experimentation with finishes and the way things looked and sharpening and different things. And so each one has some slight variability to it, and that's really cool to me. It makes each one of these prototypes very special. And like I said, the production version is going to be coming out with Jake Hoback Knives here in the near future. It looks like they're going to be released sometime in the next month or so. So let's move this out of the way. Let's go ahead and get some vital signs on this very interesting knife. Right here up front, we're looking at a 4-inch blade. If I measure it, yeah, right at 4 inches. And the cutting edge is also 4 inches. The overall length is quite long at about 9.75 inches here. The handle length is coming in at about 5.4 inches, almost 5.5. Right here, the grip area is coming in at 4 3/4. So it is a big knife. Also, let's get some measurements in this dimension. The blade stock coming in here, very beefy blade stock, 196 thousandths right there. And so that means that the handle with these nice thick titanium slabs is also going to be coming in rather thick at 0.63 inches. So everything about this knife is bigger and badder than the IFS 20, and that was the goal. Let's go ahead and get a tallness of the blade right here, 1.28 inches right there on the tallness of the blade. Let's bring out another couple of knives for a size comparison on this guy. Here is a Spyderco Paramilitary 2 and then a Para 3. So you can see this is a really, really big knife right here, bigger than the PM2. I'll go ahead and bring out my other large knife here that I like to use for a size comparison. This is a Benchmade Crooked River that's been customized in their customizing little app on their website. Here's a newcomer that looks somewhat similar in some ways. This is the 0801 Ti from ZT, another titanium handled knife. This is no small knife, but you can see how much bigger the Buster is right here. So let's go ahead and break this knife down anatomically. And this is why I had to release the 10-minute cap on this video, because I really want to get into the details and talk to you guys about what's going on at each part, and I don't want to be limited by time so that I leave something out. So let's look at this blade. It is this monster Wharncliffe blade of M390 steel. Now, what makes this blade interesting? It's okay, great, it's another Wharncliffe blade, but this was actually brought to life by a significant amount of use of wire EDM technology. This is the first knife, as far as I know, and I think Snecx claims this to be true, where the actual primary bevels of the knife were cut with wire EDM. Wire EDM is a technology where a wire is used to usually cut out just the profile of the blade, and then the main bevels here are ground on a belt grinder or something like that. But on this knife, these primary bevels were cut with wire EDM. Now, the final edge and everything like that was finished by hand. So he tried to use the wicked edge at one point, but he actually did every single one of these edges on stones by hand. So perfectly done edge. It's amazingly symmetrical. That also, the wire EDM of the primary bevels means that you get this ridiculous precision and accuracy and symmetry of everything. Because it's done by computer, it's perfectly done. I need to emphasize the attention to detail in every single aspect of this knife, and I hope by the end of the video you've gathered why I'm so enthusiastic about this knife and why I think it's one of the coolest knives I've ever handled. So we talked about the bevels, we talked about the edge being completely done by hand. Let's talk about the finish work that's going on here. Snecx did a lot of posting on his Instagram. My video here will in no way compare to the explanations and videos and pictures and everything that he took during the development of this knife. Head over to his Instagram at Snecx, and you will be able to see some more information. But everything down to the depth and the size of the letters and the way that the letters were milled. You can see that he had some versions where the letters didn't quite look right. So it details all of those little things. And these are parts where he was sort of calculating out the machining in a lot of different ways. We'll talk about that in a minute too. The finish on the blade was also a point of difficulty for him. This is where most of the blades differ in terms of their subtle changes from one to the other. He struggled for a little while to find his perfect blade finish. This later version right here, number 14, actually has the final blade finish on it, and it is a very wear-resistant blade finish. He showed a video of himself dragging some sandpaper across it, and you could barely tell it happened, but he had a machine satin finish one, and it just looked terrible. It was just all scratched up. The flats right here are done in a hand-rubbed satin. What I want you to appreciate is that the satin has a very unique angle to it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to capture it perfectly, but the way that the angle is done on this side perfectly matches this side as well, even though they're hand rubbed. It's just an incredible feat of symmetry going on right there. The blade itself is actually unbelievably functional and usable. The very, very tall flat grind means that there's not a ton of material behind the edge. This knife actually slices pretty darn well. It's certainly more of an axe in a lot of ways, but that's what he intended for this knife to be. If you watch his Instagram video of him opening up a coconut with this thing, he really intended for this thing to be more like an axe than an actual slicing knife. And in that regard, he certainly achieved it. But if you wanted to EDC this thing, the tip is incredible. The way that sort of drop is done down to the tip leaves a ton of steel out there and means that you've got a strong tip. The full flat belly right here, and it is perfectly flat. There's almost some optical illusion sometimes that it looks like a recurve, but it's not. You can lay it down on a perfectly flat surface, and it is unbelievably flat. The blade works really, really well, though. I've used it to do some very slight paper cutting and things. This is not my knife, and it is an unbelievably valuable object, and so I'm not going to be hard using this knife in the way that Snecx intended for it to be. There is a little bit of jimping up on the top of the blade, and there's a little divot where your thumb can rest right there, so that's pretty nice. Ergonomic consideration right there. Notice that the differences in the finish also, where the swedge right here is done in the same media blasted finish, but the top of the knife and then the face of the knife out there are done in that hand rub satin. Just beautiful, beautiful finish work on this thing through and through. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the pivot and the deployment and everything. So, Snex's one of his primary goals, as I mentioned before, was to create a knife that ran really well on phosphor bronze washers. So this pivot runs on washers, and that is a beautiful thing. He wanted to achieve a perfect action on washers, and I will say that he has done it. Absolutely. So this thing has a very small flipper tab. So already, in order to open a knife with a small flipper tab, you need to have a smooth pivot and pivot system to begin with. And when you're running on phosphor bronze washers, you really need to have everything dialed in. This has a smoothness and an action unlike anything else I've ever felt. This feels, the pivot and the deployment and the closure feels like opening and closing a door on a Rolls Royce. It is just smooth and buttery, and every single millimeter of it is calculated and so nice. And this will only get better with time. Now, I've flicked this probably a few dozen times, enjoying myself with it. But over time, these phosphor bronze washers will continue to break in. This thing already has a very nice drop shut action. The heavy blade really allows it to kick out of the frame really nicely, and then it drops back in very, very smoothly. I really like the flipper tab. It's subtle, it's small, but it's very functional. It's small just in the same sense as, say, the Shirogorov Sigma. So let's go ahead and bring this guy out and talk about small flipper tabs. But this one is done in such a way that you actually get more than enough purchase and you're not going to misfire it. I found myself misfiring on this tiny Sigma flipper tab a lot. So the knife deploys very well, and then it locks up very solidly. Something that's important to note about that part is that he uses this absolutely massive 6mm stop pin. The reason that he uses this is that he wanted to match the pivot diameter. So inside of this pivot is the same diameter tube as you have right here. Now that is a feat of engineering in and of itself in terms of cramming those two big pins in this small of an area and then having the whole mechanism rotating around it. So that was an engineering feat in and of itself. Try to tell me, find another knife with a stop pin this thick. Even these beefy knives out there, this is an incredibly thick stop pin, and it's very cool. The pivot itself features this very unique hardware right here. If you go over and watch Austin over at Epic Snuggle Bunny's video, he talks about how all the hardware was designed in such a way that the knife could be disassembled with a credit card. And that, in fact, will work. And if you wanted to try it, I'm not going to disassemble this knife. Again, it's not mine, and again, it's quite valuable. We'll talk about that at the end. Very cool pivot hardware, though. Now, running on phosphor bronze washers, you can see in there, it's just perfectly milled out. Now we're going to talk about the detent. Okay, so the detent is a very unique part of this knife. Another thing I need to really focus on and why I need more time. So the flipper tab allows you to just launch this thing out, and then the smoothness as you come down is really unrivaled. And that is because the detent is actually a pin. This is a unique solution that Snecx has come up with, and this may be the very first knife to feature this particular means of a detent. Now, this is a multi-splintered detent pin right here. So if you take a look at it, it's actually placed into the lock bar at the very, very top of the lock bar. And you can actually see the cylinder of the pin protrudes beyond the top of the lock bar. And that is because it actually functions just like a Chris Reeve Nkosi or 25. It functions as the interface with the blade. So this is a hardened 440C stop pin, and it's press fit in such a way that it is the lock interface and it is also the detent. So when I close the knife, take a look at where the detent pin actually sits on the blade itself. Okay, he calls this an open detent system, and he wanted his knife to feature this. So the pin is perfectly radiused and contoured in such a way that it will allow the blade to slide over it in this direction with a very smooth action, and then again in this direction. Now, Snecx did mention that he got some of his inspiration from Brian Nadeau when it comes to this. If you combine Brian Nadeau's integral sort of detent nub right here, so he features on his knives a nub on the inside of the lock bar right there that's actually a milled and integral part of the lock bar insert right here. So it's actually customizable to each knife, and what that allows is a ramp so that when the blade deploys, it's very smooth, and there's none of that jumping over a lock ball, a detent ball, and then when you're closing the knife, it ramps up onto the detent instead of snagging on the circumference of a normal detent ball. So he drew his inspiration from that and from Chris Reeve knives and sort of came up with his own solution, and I find this incredibly elegant and very awesome, and I really wanted to highlight that. So not only is it the stop pin, it is the detent, and it is just brilliant in its execution, and it just looks awesome. It's finished in the same way as the rest of the hardware. Every single bit of this has just detail and perfection that goes beyond a lot of other knives. So we've talked about the pivot, we've talked about the detent. Let's go ahead and talk about these amazing handles, okay? So as mentioned on the birth certificate, this is 6AL4V titanium, and it is not slab-sided titanium. I know that it's easy to look at this knife and say, goodness, that handle is not all that different from the ZT. Maybe the ZT has more milling lines and stuff, but guys, I need to explain to you the perfection that is going on this handle, okay? So first I want to show you the different facets, okay? A facet is like on a gem, the faces of the titanium here. Look at the different facets on every side of the handle here, okay? As we go around, look at it here. Chamfering, okay? I'm going to show you. There's chamfers on chamfers. It's chamferception up in here. A chamfer within a chamfer. There all the way around. You have to see this up close to really understand what's going on. This hole is not a simple hole. The outside, it has been, okay, so it goes all the way through there. It's most of the thickness there, and then the outer rim has been chamfered perfectly. A beautiful angle that I wanted to show you is the way that the blade sits down in that hole. We'll talk about that a little bit. You can see just the tiniest bit of the blade edge right there through that window. Snecx says that's his favorite angle of the knife, and we'll talk about why that is. The handles here are well done on the outside, okay? So there's a lot of complex milling, but it's not until you get to the inside of the knife where you start to understand these sort of level of craziness that went into this thing. So I'm going to shine a light from over here. Look at how the inside is milled, okay? So the inside, it's not just pocketed out. This is not just mindlessly pocketed out to save weight and just bring the overall weight of the knife down. What Snecx was able to do, he actually did calculations in such a way where he calculated the weight of the blade with all of the material stock removed in this configuration, and then he calculated the weight of the handle and the hardware and everything, and he milled precisely the right amount of material so that this blade balances absolutely perfectly. Of course, I'm not going to be able to do it well for you on video, but he wanted the balance point to be right here at the area where your finger rests. And it is balanced. It really, really is. He wanted it to be ever so slightly towards the handle, and he achieved this balance perfectly right here. But understand that this was calculated. This is not a fluke. This is something that he did the math on and then did the design work and the CAD work and everything to make that a reality. That is an incredible, incredible feat. Something else that I need to show you is that the blade itself is actually so tall that if this knife were just left in an open pillar construction, like a lot of other knives are, this blade would actually protrude from the back of the handle and cut you right here. So the solution that Snecx came up with is this raised backspacer. The backspacer extends beyond the rest of the handle, and what you can see, especially down here at the end, is that the blade actually sits within that backspacer. Look at that centering. Unbelievable precision and perfection. When you make a knife like this, when you make a backspacer that shows you that the knife needs to be perfectly centered, it better be on center. I had a couple of knives recently from Guardian Tactical that had this style of the end, and it was off center and it looked terrible. But look at the perfection going on right here. So not only is that line carried out at the end of the backspacer there, if you look down the barrel here, it actually happens at a couple of other points. So if you look deep within the handle here, let me see if I can get a good angle. You can see, maybe I'm just messing it up. Yeah, I'm just messing it up by adding more light. You can see that that area right there was milled out, and you can actually see the cylinder of, there's a pin that's in there that's holding it together. And then up there as well, it was milled out so that the blade sits down inside of it. Snecx says that the tolerance for this is, the clearance for this is 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter. Let me bring out a ruler, and I'm going to show you how big a millimeter is, okay? These are 0.5 millimeter markers, so the distance between the 10 and the first long bar right there, that's 1 millimeter. That's all the space that he had. And I'm going to show you how many millimeters this thing has. So a very, very tiny window. And he says that was really unforgiving in the process of making these. He had a lot of knives that he had to sort of do away with, a lot of components because they didn't fit quite well. But it absolutely does fit down in there. So now take an appreciation for what this window is actually showing you. It's showing that that blade, actually, all you can see of the edge is that little bit right there, and the edge goes down into this little pocket right here and is protected perfectly. And look at the way that it sits on this end of the knife. Absolutely spectacular. Now, not only that, not only does it extend beyond the handle there, but it's also a completely see-through, it's got a flow-through design. Maybe you can see my fingers in two different areas, right here and right here. It is open enough for you to see through. Incredible, incredible attention to detail, thoughtfulness, artistic design. The jimping and the pattern here matches the pattern up here. Just an incredible thing. They mirror each other. Let's take a look at the butt of the knife a little bit. The lanyard hole is integrated into the back. If there was one area that I would say is, marginally problematic, it's the end, because it's a little bit of a bunch of sharp angles right there, but that is really a minor complaint. It's not that uncomfortable. You can just feel that there are a couple of sharp angles back there. Maybe Snecx is going to kill me for saying this, but, this seems like a missed chamfer opportunity right here. He's going to kill me for that. Anyways, taking a look here, let's also appreciate the internal and external milling of the lock bar cutout. It is milled on both sides, very precisely mirrored on both sides for symmetry. This sort of internal area that's been cut out. Just attention to detail beyond anything that I've ever seen on any knife ever. This is really a brilliant knife. I really wanted to highlight this. I'm at almost 25 minutes now of talking, and now you see why I needed that much time. There's so much detail in this knife. There's so much thoughtfulness and precision and engineering that there's no way that 10 minutes would do it justice. So I'm glad you guys were able to watch this. What do I think of this knife? I think that this knife is like the Bugatti Veyron of knives. And I say that because the Bugatti Veyron, and not the Chiron, I know there's a new version, but the Bugatti Veyron was a car engineered to be at the most perfect and most extreme of car making. They had to re-engineer how to make a car with four-wheel drive and 1,600 horsepower and 4 turbochargers. This knife is that sort of a concept. He wanted a blade that was bigger than the handle. He wanted 6mm stop pins. He wanted perfect weight distribution and balance. He wanted phosphor bronze washers. Very, very specific requirements, and he engineered this to perfection. This has been executed like the Bugatti was done back in the day. That was the best, fastest, craziest car in the world. This is one of the craziest knives in the world to me, and I am blown away by the attention detail here. It is not very often that you see this level of perfection coming out of custom knife makers' hands. Some people can grind blades really beautifully and contour handles, but not a lot of people can do the math to identify how much the handle is going to weigh versus this before he's ever cut any materials out, and plan for it with that regard. Come up with new innovations, new solutions, and then execute it so flawlessly. Now, this was definitely a passion project for him. These knives have long since been sold out, and they are selling on the secondary market for obscene prices. The price on this new from him was about $1,700, so $1,700. He auctioned off the very last one, and it sold at auction for $8,200. You can find these anywhere from about $3,000 to $7,000 on the secondary market. So understand that this is a rare knife, and it is absolutely perfect in so many ways. I do think that this merits a very high price. Now, $8,000 is insane. You know, if you have the money, go to town. This is not my knife. I did not buy this knife. I want to say a big shout out to my friend Anchor for sending this to me. He comments on my videos. He's on Instagram as Shy Timber. Super awesome guy. Lives over in India and shipped this knife through me when he bought it on the secondary market. Thank you so much, my friend. It has been an absolute pleasure to hold this knife, handle it, and present it to you guys. So why don't you guys let me know what you think of the Snecx Design Buster. Go and follow Snecx over on Instagram. Follow me at Dr. Frunky. Look out for the Jake Hoback Knives production version of the Buster coming out soon. Click like and subscribe. And as always, guys, this is Dr. Frunky saying take care.